In Raphael's The School of Athens, you can find Socrates talking enthusiastically with his students on the left. Among them, Alcibiades stands out. He was well known as a handsome general in Athens. There is another pupil of Socrates who is quite famous. It's Aristippus. He might be one of the students in the painting. Let's say it's him. Socrates didn't receive tuition from his students. It's because he believed that his students recollected what they already knew, so he didn't really teach them anything. Like Socrates, his students didn't accept tuition from their own students either. Except for one person, Aristippus. Aristippus received tuition from his own students. So others criticized him for this. To this, Aristippus replied,
Socrates may not have made money, but he accepted entertainment.
Yes, that's right. After engaging in discussions with his students, Socrates used to have an after-party called symposiums. Aristippus, who made some money for himself, must have spent a lot of money. One day, when Socrates asked him where he made so much money, he replied,
I made money where you did.
Aristippus was born in Cyrene, Libya, which was a colonial city of ancient Greece at that time. When he was young, he went to Athens and became a pupil of Socrates. So he was acquainted with Plato and was friends with Diogenes. However, Aristippus had different ideas from Plato and Diogenes. He explicitly indulged in physical pleasure. Probably no one in the history of Western philosophy emphasized physical pleasure as explicitly as Aristippus did. This is called hedonism. This is the story for today. Aristippus had a skeptical view of the world. We cannot know about the world. All we know are sense experiences of objects, not the nature of objects themselves. For example, we taste sweetness when we eat honey. We know the sensation that honey causes, but we don't know what honey is. All we can know are the sensations caused by objects. According to Aristippus, there are 3 types of sensations. First, the violently changing sensation. Second, the gently changing sensation. And third, the tranquil sensation. The violently changing sensation brings pain. The gently changing sensation brings pleasure. And the tranquil sensation produces no emotions. So there is only one thing we must pursue: the pleasure caused by gently changing sensations. Aristippus believed that pleasure is the most important thing in life. It's no use searching for the meaning of life or the truth. Not only is it useless to search for such things, it is also impossible. So, you shouldn't waste your time on such things. It only brings fatigue to the body. The most important thing in life is physical pleasure. It is also foolish to delay the present pleasure for the sake of the future pleasure. Momentary pleasure is happiness. Therefore, in order to be happy, you have to indulge in physical pleasure that is present in the moment. In a nutshell, sensation is emotion. The physical pleasure is happiness. Aristippus practiced his philosophy in his own life. In ancient Greece, there was a job called hetera. Heterae were courtesans who provided entertainment, dance, and music in the symposium. They were high-class prostitutes, so to speak. Aristippus even hired a hetera as his lover. There was a famous hetera in Athens, Phryne. One day, she stood in court in Athens on the charges of blasphemy. When the jury were about to rule her guilty, her lawyer stripped her clothes off. When her milky white body was revealed, the jury was mesmerized. Then the lawyer said,
Do you have to kill such a beautiful woman?
Then the story goes that the jury changed their mind and acquitted her. However, physical pleasure causes many problems. Once physical pleasure is reached, the body demands stronger pleasure. Then, you end up immersing in excessive pleasure, which eventually leads to pain. For example, once you start doing drugs, your body constantly demands more, and you end up in pain. Aristippus says we should be wary of pleasure like drugs. This kind of pleasure is pleasure that can possess you. Aristippus believed you should own your own pleasure instead of being possessed by it. That's why he said,
Eat and drink as much as you can master.
Enjoy in moderation. The purpose of life is physical pleasure, but it takes some insight and moderation to enjoy it. So for Aristippus, Wisdom in life was a means of achieving the best pleasure possible. One day, Aristippus went to Dionysius first, the king of Syracuse. And when Dionysius asked him why he came,
He said, "When I needed wisdom, I went to Socrates. But now I need money, so I came to your majesty."
he came for money. He really was a man of candor. One day, Aristippus asked Dionysius for a favor because he wanted something. When Dionysius refused his request, Aristippus knelt down under the king's feet and begged to get what he wanted. When people laughed at him for his servile attitude, Aristippus said,
"It's not me who should be ashamed. It's the king whose ears are under his feet."
he was a peculiar character. Plato and Aristippus were fellow pupils of Socrates. One day, Dionysius invited both Plato and Aristippus to a banquet. The king, being drunk, told people to dance in red clothing. The respectable Plato refused the king's orders, saying he could not wear red clothing, which is worn by women. However, it is said that Aristippus danced in red as the king told him to. After that, Dionysius began treating Aristippus quite rudely. However, Aristippus took all of the king's rudeness. When people asked Aristippus why he was so tolerant to the king, he said,
"Just as a fisherman has to endure a storm to catch fish in the sea, shouldn't I withstand the bubble from the glass to have a good drink?"
Diogenes was a contemporary of Aristippus. Diogenes was a man of such pride that he told Alexander the Great to stand out of the sun and move away. He's a completely different character from Aristippus. But Aristippus and Diogenes were quite close. One day, Diogenes was washing vegetables by a stream when Aristippus was passing by. And Diogenes said to him,
"You know what, Aristippus? If you knew the taste of this vegetable, you wouldn't have to bow down to the nobles."
He was making fun of Aristippus, who flattered up the nobles for money. Then Aristippus said,
"You know what, Diogenes? If you knew how to socialize, you wouldn't have to eat those vegetables."
Aristippus' idea that pleasure is the goal of life greatly influenced Epicurus. However, Epicurus' pursuit of pleasure was different from that of Aristippus. Epicurus thought that excessive physical pleasure ends up becoming pain. So he tried to maximize pleasure by refraining from it. In that sense, what Epicurus calls pleasure is spiritual rather than physical. The pleasure of the mind is the real pleasure. So Epicurus thought that true pleasure is to be in a state without any fear by sharing friendship and properly recognizing death and God. So while both ideas of Aristippus and Epicurus are called hedonism, they are talking about different types of pleasures. In that sense, there seems to be three positions on pleasure in ancient Western philosophy. First, the hedonism of Aristippus says to enjoy physical pleasure. The hedonism of Epicurus says to enjoy the pleasure of the mind while restraining physical pleasure. And the cynicism of Diogenes says the freedom of temperance is the most important thing. These three positions still have a significant impact on us today. Simply put, the people who call out carpe diem and YOLO are descendants of Aristippus. The people who strive for non-possession and minimalism are descendants of Epicurus. And the monks and ascetics are descendants of Diogenes. Most people are somewhere between these three positions. It seems that people are all the same, whether you're ancient Greek or living in the 21st century. Let's wrap up. First, Aristippus says that in order to be happy, one must indulge in the present physical pleasure. The physical sensation causes the feeling of happiness. Second, he emphasized the pleasure of possessing, not the pleasure of being possessed. If a pleasure like drugs is the pleasure of being possessed, it can be said that sex with a loved one is the pleasure of possessing. So he says, enjoy and drink as much as you can master. Third, the ancient Greeks had three positions on pleasure. They are the physical hedonism of Aristippus, the mental hedonism of Epicurus, and Diogenes' restraint of pleasure.